So Michael Popok, Legal AF. We got more updates in Oath Keepers being sentenced for being convicted as seditious conspirators and being part of the broader conspiracy, along with 18 years sentenced to federal prison, Stuart Rhodes, 14 years, Kelly Meggs, and now the people right under them, but that were equally convicted of seditious conspiracy are getting sentenced by the same judge, Judge Maida. Come on down, Roberto Minuta and Ed Vallejo, because it's your time to get sentenced. Now, there's a big difference between these two. First of all, they weren't at the top apex of leadership. And as far as Judge Maida was concerned, and he's the one that it matters when it comes time for sentencing, he thought that both of them, in very tearful addresses to the court, throwing Stuart Rhodes under the bus, saying that they were duped by Stuart Rhodes, they were duped by Donald Trump to join in on this folly to try to overthrow the government. And in doing so, the judge felt that they showed enough contrition to get a much lesser sentence than even the Department of Justice wanted for both of them, mainly because he saw both of those people as having some ability to rehabilitate themselves, having led kind of normal, if not exemplary, lives before taking up arms with Stuart Rhodes. Stuart Rhodes is a different story altogether. Remember, Judge Maida, when he sentenced Stuart Rhodes a week or two ago, said, "I see no hope for you. You continue to be a danger to society. And therefore, and you show no contrition or remorse today, and therefore you're going away for 18 years. And good luck, Stuart Rhodes, in getting any time off for good behavior, getting that 15% off that federal prisoners sometimes get, because even today he says he's a prisoner of war. So he shows no contrition or remorse, and good luck in front of the parole board when your time comes. So Minuta and Vallejo said, we were duped. We never wanted to do this, this Trump rah-rah stuff, take up arms, try to overthrow our country. And the judge believed them, that it showed that they were remorseful and contrite in his courtroom and in his actions and in their actions. They didn't lie on the stand. He thought that Minuta had downplayed his role, because Minuta actually took the position that he was just there to help the police, that the police had called for reinforcement and he was there helping the police. And the judge said, there's nothing about your words or actions that day, sir, that indicate that that's what you were doing. You may have deluded yourself into thinking that's what you were doing, but you were doing quite another set of things. And so the government wanted, the DOJ wanted 17 years for Minuta, and the judge actually sentenced him to only 4.5 years, finding that he was a victim, really in his own right, of Stuart Rhodes and ultimately of Donald Trump. Ed Vallejo, who we talked about on Legal AF right here on the MeidasTouch network in the past, he was the armorer. He was the one that was in Arlington, Virginia at a Best Western with a cache of weapons, ready to bring them in across the river, across the Potomac, to hand them out to the Oath Keepers. Never got the chance to do that, but that was his part of the conspiracy. Now, he wasn't convicted of he was actually convicted of conspiracy, seditious conspiracy, both these gentlemen. The advantage to that, because you guys out there, everybody's watching, is hearing a lot now about conspiracy, because it's likely that Fani Willis, the Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor, is going to use a conspiracy indictment to bring in all of these disparate acts and parties and defendants into one conspiracy. What's the advantage for the prosecutor? Because it makes each co-conspirator liable for the terrible acts of the other co-conspirator, even if they weren't involved in that particular bad act. If they were knitted together in the conspiracy by the pleading and then by the jury verdict, you're in for a penny, in for a pound. You may not have, for instance, set fire to the house. You might have only stolen the car as part of the conspiracy, but you're liable for the house burning down. God forbid somebody died in that house. Same thing here at the Jan 6 conspiracy. They may not have each done all of the bad things, but they're responsible for each other's bad things together in one presentation to the jury and return of a verdict. And at sentencing time, the judge has to take into account all of the bad acts of others in sentencing you to the appropriate sentence under the federal sentencing guidelines. And that's what the judge did here. But he has his own discretion within the guidelines to reject the Department of Justice's recommendation, which he did, to find that unlike Stuart Rhodes, who the judge found at his sentencing the 18 years, was still a menace to society, right? Was still a threat to democracy. He found that Vallejo and Minuta were not, that they were contrite and remorseful, and probably when they got out of jail, the judge hoped they would go back to the normal lives they had before, which was not being part of the Oath Keepers. One guy was a tattoo parlor owner, and the other guy was a recovering alcoholic. So he felt, okay, you guys go back to being sort of normal, go back under the rock, be normal citizens. Don't take up arms against your government any longer. Don't try to overthrow with violent revolution. Go home. Stuart Rhodes is a different story. Stuart Rhodes is supremely intelligent, despite the fact he shot his own eye out at a gun range by accident. That's how he got the patch. Yale Law graduate, and had a charisma about him, the way that a lot of serial killers do, to get other people to follow his lead, like Charlie Manson. And the judge pointed out that he saw Vallejo and Minuta a bit as victims themselves. He wasn't going to not let them go to jail because of it, but saw them as victims. So that's the sentencing that we're getting from a judge who normally is hang 'em high Maida, but, had a bit of heart and compassion, which federal judges are supposed to be doing during sentencing, to find distinctions and differences among the co-conspirators, depending upon their background and what they did at the trial itself and what they have done since in showing remorse or contrition. And that's how that kind of goes along the continuum from no remorse, no contrition, you're going away for 18 years. Show some remorse and some contrition, do a little help with the FBI and the Department of Justice and against the other Oath Keepers, and renounce your position in that organization. We're going to cut your proposed sentence in half by the Department of Justice and see what happens there. So that's what's going on with this highest group of seditious conspirators. There's new reporting, too, I wanted to throw into this hot take, because I thought it was interesting, and so hopefully you will too, is that there's going to be a sentencing in July of Noah Bacon, a guy from Massachusetts, relatively young, who, was not a seditious conspirator. He was, at best, an obstructionist of Congress, which also carries with it a very high sentence. Now, Judge Christopher Cooper is going to be the judge sentencing Noah Bacon there. He broke in, did a little pushing and shoving, got into the Senate, stood there for 10 minutes, watched some other mob members beat up cops and all of that. So now's the time some people might ask after got excited there, after following these hot takes, like, why does sentencing take so long in the federal system? Because there's a process, and it takes 3 to 6 months, usually about 4 months, to go from the jury verdict to all the post-verdict due process rights under the federal constitution and law that defendants have. They get the right to prepare a sentencing memo, get letters, be contrite, get letters of recommendation, if you will, about their background, to speak on their behalf. And the government does the same thing. And then the U.S. Sentencing Commission and probation, they prepare a report analyzing the sentencing guidelines, all the upward departures and downward departures, and how many points you get for this and how many points you get for this crime. And, if it involved destruction of property or injury to people, you bump it up 5 levels. And, it's a whole very complicated set of calculus. That takes time, and both sides get to participate. That gets delivered to the judge. He sets a sentencing hearing. The victims and their families get to also submit information and testify at the evidentiary hearing. The defendants get to speak, even if they never spoke before. They get to speak now or forever hold their peace. And then the judge imposes sentencing. Takes a while. So we have a July 27th sentencing coming up on Noah Bacon. This is interesting because he's the second felon in his family. And the other felon, who's a reasonably well-known guy who ended up cooperating with the Robert Mueller investigation of Donald Trump and the Russia collusion, Sam Patton, Sam Patten at one time was a relatively well-known and successful lobbyist in Washington, but somewhere along the way, the train jumped the tracks, and he started secretly raising money from foreign entities who are not allowed to contribute to American politics or presidential elections, and got a $50,000 campaign contribution paid to the Trump inauguration fund, which he money laundered from an entity in Russia and Ukraine into his own account using secret offshore bank accounts, and then routed it through an American to deposit into the Trump bank account for his campaign. And Mueller caught him. And as part of the Mueller investigation, there were a number of people who got prosecuted, and Sam Patten was one of them. And he got sentenced to 3 years probation and a large fine. And now apparently his life is completely in tatters and in ruins. And he went from being, a well-known lobbyist in Washington who got convicted of foreign lobbying without registration to now he's a self-professed bus driver and line cook, and hasn't been able to recover his past career. He wrote a letter of recommendation on behalf of his nephew, Mr. Bacon, to the judge. And he said, look, I believe in restorative justice. And I believe that you can come out of a prison situation or a sentencing or a conviction and make yourself a better person. And I think that's what's going to happen to my nephew. But he led it off in the letter with, I'm the second felon. My nephew's the second felon in our family. Now, there's also a sad kind of postscript to Patten, totally unrelated to anything I just told you on this hot take. He got, in a random act of violence, got brutally stabbed in Washington in 2020 and almost was decapitated. So, of course, that ended up in the letter of reference as well. But it just shows you, how all of these things are sort of only in Washington moments are coming together on the sentencing and the interconnection and relationship. I mean, if you would have told me before I learned of this for the hot take, that somebody that was part of the Russia investigation for Robert Mueller and was convicted of a $50,000 illegal donation to the Trump campaign or the Trump inauguration would have one of his nephews be a Jan 6 insurrectionist, I guess that wouldn't shock me. But I'm just showing the connective tissue here and bring it to you and then let you make your own conclusions. That's what we got on this particular hot take. We're following the sentencing of all Jan 6 defendants really, really closely in a way that mainstream media is not. I'm doing it on hot takes like this one. I sit at the intersection of U.S. law and politics. I run hot takes that are, whether it's about Jan 6 or Donald Trump, U.S. Supreme Court developments, due process rights, constitutional rights, First Amendment rights, anything that's a politically charged litigation matter, we're going to cover it on the MeidasTouch Network. I'm doing it on hot takes like this one. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up. It helps bring this content to you on a regular basis, and the volume, it brings the frequency of the content to your door. And you can leave a comment. I've been known to jump in. We can have a dialogue together, open up a conversation. And you can follow me also on the Legal AF podcast, a podcast at the intersection of law and politics on the MeidasTouch Network, on YouTube, and every place you get your podcasts from. And you can follow me, Michael Popok, on all things social media at MS Popok. This is Michael Popok, Legal AF reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram at MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.